that he in turn got from Brother Roy Deaver. It has a cry in verse 1, a complaint in verse 2, confidence expressed in verses 3 and 4, care in verse 5, character verses 6 and 7, and then corruption in verse 8. And if you happen to, if you're jotting that down and you kind of notice a pattern to the way those verses are laid out and kind of mirror one another, it is not accidental. That is certainly purposeful on the psalmist's part. But we start out, as we so often do, typical of many of the psalms, with the psalmist's cry. Help, Lord, for the godly man ceaseth, for the faithful fail from among the children of men. So the writer is discouraged, concerned about the lives of the people with whom he's associated. Evidently, and again, it fits so well alongside Jeremiah. It's again that passage from Jeremiah 5 keeps coming to mind. Societies seem to inevitably reach this point where godliness becomes the exception rather than the rule. As I so often find myself saying these days, you can't help but think of our own modern society. 50, 60, 70 years ago, there were plenty of people that you would call, generally speaking, good people, righteous people. Not in an absolute sense, certainly, who is, but in the sense that people tend to be relatively honest, fair-minded, truthful, respectful, all of those character traits that you associate with, just generally speaking, good, upstanding people. And even then, at any point in history, not everyone is like that, but the wicked, the one who lies, who deceives, who defrauds, who oppresses the poor, who's just violent and criminal in nature is the exception. Certainly here in Psalm 12, whenever this was composed, that was not the case. The good, upstanding person was the exception. Just like in Jeremiah 5, go forth to and fro in the streets of Jerusalem. Find me one good man. You're not gonna be able to. Okay, so this is certainly the case with the psalmist. The godly man ceaseth; the faithful fail from among the children of men. They're nowhere to be found. And again, I'll point out, not in an absolute sense, because even if it's just the psalmist, right? I mean, you think back to Noah's day, right? Go all the way back to Genesis 6. Every thought of man was only evil continually. Well, there was at least Noah, right? I mean, there's always that, even if it's a tiny few that remain faithful. You read in the Old Testament over and over about the remnant, right? The remnant is ever there. But again, in poetic terms, just like in Jeremiah, the godly man is certainly few and far between. So he continues in verse 2 with a complaint. Right? So verse 1, he cries out to the Lord. The godly man is scarce to be found. They speak vanity, everyone with his neighbor. Vanity, you may think of our ongoing study of Ecclesiastes, right? So, what one person has to say to another is empty. There's absolutely nothing of substance there, and I think more to the point, nothing of any truth, nothing that one can count on. They speak vanity, everyone with his neighbor. With flattering lips and with a double heart do they speak. So this is a time when dealings between people are just nothing but falsehoods, deceit, and yet again, so take for example, take maybe the realm of business or politics. I suspect, I think, maybe I'm not old enough to fully have known this personally, but there was a time when even in those sorts of circles, people at a very high level in the business world, in the political world, could for the most part be counted on to be, again, relatively honest, relatively truthful in their dealings with one another and the things that they said, and have some semblance of conscience. Today it just seems to be the case that they'll say or do whatever they can to get away with whatever is in their own self-interest. Vanity, they speak vanity, everyone with his neighbor, with flattering lips and with a double heart do they speak. Right? You can't believe a word that they say. Everyone around the psalmist, everywhere he looks, is lying. There's no truthfulness, no honesty to be found. Verses 3 and 4, the psalmist is confident about one thing, though. What is that? The Lord shall cut off all flattering lips. Again, there's that imprecatory sentiment. And the tongue that speaketh proud things. Okay, so he is confident that despite the fact that this is going on around everywhere he looks, again, Jeremiah 5, 1 and 2, the Lord is going to deal with it. This also is somewhat reminiscent, I think, of Habakkuk. And of course, Habakkuk and Jeremiah were contemporaries of one another, right? They lived at if not the exact same time, very, very, very close proximity to one another. They both deal with the Babylonian judgment upon the southern kingdom of Judah. And in this psalm, I get a little sense of Habakkuk's plea. But very similar to this, right? There's the people are utterly wicked. There's wickedness everywhere he looks. God, when are you going to do something about it? Right? When are you going to step in and punish these people and deal with this terrible, terrible society? The psalmist seems confident, right? Just as Habakkuk ultimately is, that even though this is going on now, it isn't going to go on forever. The Lord will deal with this wickedness. Verse 4, speaking of these people, right? The people who are going to have their flattering lips and proud speaking tongues cut off. Those who have said, with our tongue will we prevail, our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us? Okay, so these are people certainly who assume that what we read in verse 3 is not going to happen. Right? It's my mouth, it's my tongue, and I'm going to use it however I want. Who is Lord over me, or who is Lord over us? And it's a rhetorical question. I mean, the implied answer from their point of view is no one. Yet again, I point you to our own modern society. Right? You can't tell me what to say. I'm my own Lord. Right? I decide I'm going to say whatever I want to say. And who's going to do anything about it? That's the attitude of these people in the psalmist's day. Again, the psalmist, verse 3, is confident that the Lord is going to do something about it, but these people that he's talking about are equally confident that he won't. Okay, verse 5. We see care following Brother Deaver's outline. For the oppression of the poor, for the sighing of the needy. Again, going back to that common cause that you find between Psalm 12 and the literary prophets. The plight of the downtrodden, the poor, the needy. Now will I arise, saith the Lord. I will set him in safety from him that puffeth at him. One thing that you find in both Old Testament and New, you find it in the prophets. You find it in the law. There's a popular, or a very well-known line from the Old Testament. And in fact, it's quoted by Jesus in the New Testament. The poor you will always have with you. And so you find that in the Torah, in the law. You find this sentiment throughout throughout the literary prophets, as I've already noted. You find it with Jesus in the Gospels. You find it in the epistles as well. God has special concern for the poor, for those who are unable to defend themselves. And that particular statement, the poor you will always have with you. Sometimes I think people, when you hear people use that when they quote it, sometimes the idea that seems to accompany it is, you're never going to be able to solve it. Right? You have the poor in your community around you. No matter how hard you try, they're always going to be there, right? And sometimes that can kind of lead to the notion of, well, why bother in the first place? They can take care of themselves. But that particular phrase, if you go back to where it's originally found, Deuteronomy, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the context of, in the old law, there's provision for things to be reset, as it were. For the land to go back to the original tribes, for people to be released from debts, from obligations. It's found in that particular context. And I do believe the idea there is, Don't assume that someone or something else is going to fix the problem, right? So in other words, yeah, my neighbor's poor, but you know what? Next year, everything's going to be reset in his life, right? His debt's going to be discharged. He's going to. This other thing that's coming along is going to help him, so I don't have to. So I think in reality, that particular phrase means kind of the opposite of what it's sometimes taken to mean, right? The poor you always have with you. It doesn't mean that just don't worry about them, right? You can't fix it. On the contrary, you can't assume that someone else will, right? You still have an obligation to do what you can to help them, even if it looks like something else may remedy the problem. So again, verse 5, the oppression of the poor, the sighing of the needy. You find Old Testament and New, God always has a special place of concern for the poor, the needy, the downtrodden, the defenseless. I will set him in safety from him that puffeth at him. Who is that? It goes back to the same people that we read of in verse 2, verse 3, and verse 4. Those who were liars, who were deceitful, are also taking advantage of the less fortunate. Okay, verses 6 and 7. The character of the Lord. The words of the Lord are pure words, as silver tried in a furnace of earth, purified 7 times. Silver tried in a furnace, right? They are dependable, right? They're proven, purified 7 times. 7, as we discussed a number of times, working our way through Revelation not very long ago, tends to indicate perfection, completeness. So the words of the Lord are perfectly pure. They've been tried, they've been proven, there is nothing lacking. And again, that kind of harkens back to verse 3, right? You're talking about, what words of the Lord? The fact that the Lord is going to take care of the poor, He is going to execute judgment. Even if it's not happening now, it is going to happen. You can count on it. It's also worth noting, contrast the words of the Lord with the words of the people that the psalmist is railing against, right? The words of the Lord are pure words, silver tried in a furnace of earth. How were the words of these wicked men described? You go back to verse 2, vanity, emptiness, absolutely nothing whatsoever of any substance or truthfulness. So it's the polar opposite of these men that the psalmist rails against. Thou shalt keep them, O Lord, thou shalt preserve them from this generation forever. Again, the Lord is going to see to their cause. Now, here's what's interesting. Verse 8. As I said, this psalm is a bit different from some of the others that we've seen because it ends on a down note. You would expect, if this psalm were like the others that we've seen, like most psalms, it would have ended with verse 7. Right? I mean, just kind of pictures you have the psalmist who cries out, there's not a good man to be found anywhere. All the people are utterly wicked. The Lord's going to deal with it, even though they think He won't. The Lord sees what's happening to the poor, to the needy. He sees how they're being mistreated, and He's going to do something about it. Then verse 7, thou shalt keep them, O Lord, thou shalt preserve them from this generation forever. Period, end. Right? But that's not how it ends. Verse 8, the wicked walk on every side when the vilest men are exalted. Which I find somewhat interesting that it ends the way that it does. Here's what... So Brother Waycaster has a comment on this, and then there's another from a commentary. He says, the state of things as if the vile person was exalted and honored. But things are not always as they seem, and there will come a time when God will come to the forefront. This is what the psalmist pleads throughout this psalm. So, this is how it seems to be, but not necessarily how it is, and certainly not how it's going to be. Not how it's going to be in the end. Again, verses 3 and 7 in particular certainly bear that out. But here's another comment from Kyle Lindelich, who famously wrote a commentary on the Old Testament. There are a bazillion commentaries out there on the New Testament. No shortage of them. Old Testament commentaries are fewer and further between. Albert Barnes wrote a good commentary series on the Old Testament, good for the most part. I don't recommend everything in it, but fairly good. And then Kyle and DeLitch also, yeah, and a few others, but there aren't many. So they conclude, thus even at last the depressing view of the present in the psalmist's time prevails amidst the confession of a more consolatory hope. The present is gloomy, but the future is lighted up as a consolation against this gloominess. This psalm is a ring, and this central oracle is its jewel. So certainly I think it concludes on the note that this is the reality for the psalmist at that point in time, just as it was for Habakkuk, right? I mean, and Jeremiah for that matter. You go back to Jeremiah 5, the wicked walk on every side, the vilest men are exalted. Just like our society today, right? You know, the wicked certainly seem to prosper. You know, the most wicked among them seem to be the ones who rise the highest, who are exalted and put on a pedestal by the fellow wicked people all around them. And so does the psalmist concludes. But again, verse 3 and 7, it's clear that it isn't his expectation. It's not his expectation that this is going to continue. The Lord is going to deal with the wickedness. But again, at the point in time that he's writing this, clearly that is not the case. So some lessons that we take from him. Brother Wecaster has a number here. The fundamental lesson, we should never fear the opposition because God is on our side. We've seen that in a number of Psalms up to this point. I personally get the feeling that this particular one is in more dire circumstances, generally speaking. We've seen a bit of that in some of the prior Psalms, but in some of the Psalms we've seen up to this point, it tends to be the psalmist, particularly, who is so troubled and so vexed, who has enemies that are pursuing him. He's on the run. Here in verse 12, or in Psalm 12, you get the distinct impression that this is not just the psalmist, that this is, you know, the whole, the people, the whole society, the whole culture, all around them. It's a particularly dark and gloomy time. Lessons here regarding our speech. Verse 2 describes the speech of the wicked. They speak vanity, they have flattering lips, and a double heart or a hypocritical heart. Right? So certainly there's a lesson to be had there. Flattering lips, right? Those who only say what people want to hear. Typically, you know, because you want to get something for yourself out of it, there's certainly a bit of self-interest involved there. You know, I'll say whatever you want to hear. Because I'm trying to deceive you in some way. And with a double heart do they speak. Again, a double heart, the idea of hypocrisy, of believing one thing but saying another. You know, James 1, James speaks of the double-minded man who is unstable in all his ways. Right? There's certainly the things that come out of his mouth are not to be trusted. And again, they speak vanity. That same idea from Ecclesiastes. It's emptiness, nothing of substance, nothing you can count on. That's for sure. Certainly, nothing you can count on. Nothing you can bank on that they're going to say. A proud and haughty person may cause one to say, "Who is Lord over us?" Right? We find that question in verse 4. Who is Lord over us? Certainly, this happens when people are getting away with something. As again, evidently is the case at the point in time that this psalm is concerned. Right? You know, you go out and you do something wicked, and there's no immediate consequence. Right? I mean, what does such a person tend to do? Well, you know, that worked. Right? I got away with it. I'll go and I'll try it again. Right? And certainly if they get away with it again, then they're going to keep doing it. And the thought behind it is, you know, exactly what you find in verse 4, right? Our lips are our own. My lips are mine, right? I'll do what I want, right? It's my mouth to speak with, you know, my hands to go out and take whatever I want. Who's Lord over us? Who's Lord over me? A problem in Psalm 12, a problem today. God keeps his promises. Verse 6, this psalm certainly as you know, most of the psalms do, certainly hits upon that theme. Trouble moves godly men to prayer, verse 1. When things are going bad, when the people around you are wicked, society is waxing ever worse, where do you go? Where do you turn? The same place the psalmist does. Help, Lord, for the godly man ceaseth. Right? That's where you turn to. Certainly, the godly man ceaseth, the faithful fail from among the children of men. Certainly, when there's no one else around, you find yourself all alone, and there's not a godly or faithful person in sight. Where do you turn? If you can't find any help, you can't find any support looking around, always look upward. Verse 4, prayer strengthens faith. We cast our cares upon God in the hour of trial, and there's confidence to be found in that, right? You find the psalmist in dire straits here clearly, in the wicked time in which he's living, and yet by looking to God, by offering prayer, he himself finds strength and confidence in that. Verse 5, faith inspires hope, right? God's word will not fail. Hebrews 13:5, which we mentioned in the sermon just this past Sunday, right? He will never leave us nor forsake us. Certainly the psalmist has faith in the very same. God may not be vindicating his people, or in this case, those who have been mistreated, who have been downtrodden by the wicked around them. It may not be happening right now, but we can have confidence that it will. Verses 7 and 8, hope culminates in assurance. The psalmist is confident God would keep them, right? Those who were, his words, right? The words that are pure, tried as silver in a furnace of earth 7 times over. Preserve the downtrodden from a generation of wickedness. All right, so that is Psalm 12. I hope you've enjoyed taking a few moments to walk through it and lend some thought to it today. Lord willing, we will continue next week with Psalm 13. Thank you very much for your kind attention and time.
Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord. 'Cause you mean more to me than any earthly thing. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams. In my darkest hour, you are the Lord of all I am. So won't you reign in me again? Lord, reign